So, a bit about Nick. He's from the sales and marketing background, and he has done several startups, reaching to multi-million-dollar business. Later on, in about 2000, he he developed something called human alchemy, which is a self-help audio products, for the Anglo-American books. And all around, his common theme has been problem solving, primarily. And over a period of time, he's developed this model, which is provocative change works, PCW, model of communication, and that works in various segments and industries. I'm excited to learn about this model and from his experience, and I'm sure we'll learn how this helps coaches in for the ICF Bengaluru. And welcome, Nick. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Well, firstly, I'm very envious of all the sunshine in Bangalore and in India compared to cold weather that we have in England. And even my problem-solving skills don't extend to changing the weather. But never mind. That's for somebody else to figure out. You know. My background originally, as I say, was originally in sales and marketing and in the recruitment sector, and I worked for many years doing that kind of work. And then I started to become interested in NLP and hypnosis and personal change. And from there, started to get involved in trainings and eventually came across somebody called Frank Farrelly in, it would be 2004. And I was attending one of the main NLP conferences, and I heard about Frank and decided to investigate his work, and it completely changed how I thought about communication. Frank Farrelly was the creator of provocative therapy and was a big influence on two of the main people who created the NLP model. So my experience of working with Frank was that it was a very good problem-solving and coaching model to work with different types of people. Are still able to hear me there? Just checking.
Yes, Nick, we can hear you.
All right, that's good. Okay, so in normal coaching and in NLP and normal sort of like talk therapy and coaching, you normally start off with the question, okay, so what do you want? You know, and from that point, you build up a way of guiding the person to a particular goal and to assist them in being able to achieve what they want to achieve. This is standard business practice, coaching practice, therapeutic practice. Is mostly how things work. In provocative style training and provocative therapy from Frank, that became a big part of provocative change works, or PCW, we start off with, okay, so what's the problem? And then we will encourage the client to do more of the same kind of behavior. Now, I'll say that again, because that sounds a little bit nuts. You know, this is quite a different way of working. So in PCW and provocative therapy, we keep suggesting the client does more of the behavior, and the client then responds differently. And this is all done very conversationally. So it's like as if you're talking to an old friend. So it's very simple, very elegant. And within the model, there are many different ways of actually getting information from the client and provoking the client to think differently. So we have simple things that conversationally anybody watching this would do, which may be talk louder, talk quieter, go faster, go slower, go more universal, go into details. And then there would be other things, such as one of the stances would be, it's not your fault. So you blame everything else for the problem that exists, which creates an interesting dynamic for the situation. So if you give me any kind of problem that might be a typical problem that somebody might have, anything at all.
Somebody wants to put across a problem, you can either speak or put it on a chat window.
Sorry?
Not scaling up your business.
Oh, okay. So not scaling up your business might be an example. So somebody might have a situation where they go, well, my business is this size, I want it to be this size, and I don't seem to be able to get it. Now, in a standard coaching session, you would look for, well, what resources do you need? What do you need that's going to be different? What's the time scale that you might require? What are you going to do that's going to be different than previously? You'd set up essentially like a grid to assist the client to take them forward to start to find some new way of thinking. In provocative style, you would adopt a different position. So a provocative PCW practitioner or a provocative therapist might say, there's many ways that you could do this, but one way might be, well, not everybody is going to be successful in scaling up their businesses. Some people will be hugely successful and some people won't. Now that's a big statement, which gets the person then to start to think, well, hang on a minute. It throws the question back to the client to start to give a reason why it's important to be able to actually do it. So that might be one way that you might actually do it. But there's lots of different ways that you could do it. But what you're doing is you're essentially getting the client to affirm or to think differently about the situation. So that would be, it's not your fault. That would be one example. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does, Jim. Thank you.
Now that's just one example. Another way that you might do that, and one of the stances would be to deliberately misunderstand the client. So you might say, and keeping completely sort of like normal conversation, you might say, okay, so what you're saying is you want to make your business smaller than it is at the moment, maybe half the size it is at the moment, which is obviously not what the person has said. And they would respond, no, I want to scale it up. I want to make it bigger. So what you're doing is you're testing how the person is thinking about the situation. You're getting them to affirm what they want and what is true. Now, some of this on the surface, when you first hear it, can sound a little bit nuts. You know, I understand that. You know, when I first saw Frank Farrelly working, I didn't know what to make of it. I'd been already in personal change for many, many years. I was training people in NLP. I'd done a lot of hypnosis work. And I saw this approach and I thought, it doesn't make any sense. But I could see some amazing results with the clients. Suddenly, they seemed very animated and very connected. And I started to think, there's something here that's kind of interesting. When I talked more to Frank over a period of time, I realized that if you use the analogy of, say, a martial art like Aikido, you're using the client's natural energy to start to affirm what's important and what's different. So this is a different way of working. You're arguing for the person to maintain and keep the problem. There's nothing, you know, scaling up a business is massively overrated. I mean, as soon as you start to do this, you've got more employees, more overheads, more sales to think about, more customers. You know, you give all the reasons why it's not a good idea. And then the client will come back and say, well, yes, but I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. So it gets the client to affirm and to begin to think differently. And that's that's a very different way of working. Yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Is this something
Sorry?
like reverse psychology at play here with your client? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, Frank hated the term reverse psychology, because it's just incredibly simplistic. It's one of those giant umbrella terms that people use. Even more than reverse psychology, he hated the word the unconscious. He used to say, everything nobody understands, they just throw it in this giant wastebasket called the unconscious. What it's doing is it's actually challenging the generalizations that people come up with. So it's actually testing to see if it's really important, or if it's really something that the person wants to change or to think differently. It's a very interesting way of working, because it's very conversational, but it's a very different way of working. So give me another example, and I'll give you some examples of stances, because this is probably the easiest way to demonstrate.
Not getting out of a toxic relationship.
Okay, not getting out of a toxic relationship. Okay, so the presupposition with that would be that staying in the toxic relationship is sort of like problematic, which would be a reasonable assumption, by the way. So a provocative style might be, and again, it depends on the context. There's nothing particularly wrong with toxic relationships. Sometimes toxic relationships are where people learn the most. People get extremely motivated from just being sort of challenged in particular ways. So that might be one way that you might argue the case for it.
Yep, makes sense.
Yeah. Now, I'm aware that as I'm describing this, if you have no experience of this model, there's a certain point where you think, this sounds a bit nuts, because that's what I saw when I first saw Frank working. I was on a 4-day workshop in the UK, and I had done all my coaching. I'd worked in business. I'd done NLP training. I was training people in NLP. I'd done hypnosis. I'd worked all the hypnosis products and was selling them around the world. And then I saw this style of working, and I literally went, I don't know what to make of this. I mean, maybe it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But then I started to realize a couple of things. The first was that if you want to work successfully with people as a coach or in business, the first rule, number one rule, is to get connection with the client. That's the first thing. Most people are expecting you as a coach or as a therapist to basically give advice. So the client might say, well, I'm stuck in this toxic relationship. I need to get out. The emphasis is then on the coach to say, okay, right, here's what you need to do. And they start to give advice, or they start to get information and give advice. So the responsibility shifts from the client over to the coach. And now the coach is driving the bus and making all the suggestions as to how things can be. This style of working, where you argue the case for the problem or maintaining the problem, gets the client to start to argue and respond back. Well, I mean, there's all kinds of relationships. Some things are toxic, some things are less toxic. It's the way of the world. It's how we live. That would be a big statement. The client, then you look to see how the client responds to that in that particular way. But it's all about the context and how the client responds and comes back in this way. As a provocative therapist or a PCW trainer, you're never directly giving people advice. You're just giving, unless it's really crazy advice where they go, well, hang on a minute, that doesn't really make sense. So you're always looking at how people are generalizing and thinking about the situation. So instead of offering advice, you're constantly affirming or suggesting the reasons why maintaining the problem is a good idea. And then the client comes back and starts to make suggestions and starts to voice different opinions. So what it does is it starts to shape up the way in which the problem's been thought. Any questions on any of that? Because that will be different to pretty much any other way of working. Hello, anybody out there?
So, Nick, is it possible to talk about any particular case study where you have seen some drastic
Sure.
changes, right?
Sure.
And it would be fantastic if somebody would wants to, if you would be open to do a demo, for example, if somebody comes up with some problem statement and you could immediately apply.
Could do both. I can give you a case study. I can give you let's think. Okay, I'll give you a sports case study because that's a good example.
Okay.
Because thing with sports and business is that they can be evaluated. Now the other thing in PCW is we just talked a little bit about the provocative element. That's only one ingredient. So let's not get too carried away and think that's the whole thing. What we're talking about in problem solving is, here's the end result of what's happening. This is the end result of what's happening in the situation. This could be business, coaching, therapy. The end result is a result of how the person is feeling and how the person is thinking. So there's a sequence of how we get to this point. Now, mostly how people feel determines the behavior and what then happens. So, for example, I had an athlete who came to see me, who rang me up, who wanted to be able to qualify for the Commonwealth Games, so major competition in the United Kingdom. And she said, the problem I have at the moment is my running time, or the end result, my speed of running for the 200 meters is not fast enough. Okay, that's the end result. That's what she's experiencing. So I say, okay, so, and she said, the best speed I ever had, my lifetime best, was about 2 years ago. But now when I'm starting to do these races, I'm never really able to get to the speed that I want to get to. I have too much anxiety before I start the race, and I know that loses me time. That's the information she's presented. So as a PCW practitioner, my job is to say, okay, she's talking about the anxiety being a problem that is impeding her getting to the end result. So the question, the $1 million question, or the trillion rupee question, I'm not sure what the exchange rate would be, but is, how is she creating the anxiety? What is it that's creating the anxiety that then creates the problem? So we're interested in PCW about the hows. How is this problem being maintained and being created? So I say to her, so, okay, when you have had this feeling of anxiety, what typically is happening? Because there's something that happens in order to create the feeling. Anybody watching this or listening to this, any feeling that you have ever had or can ever had has to be created by some way of thinking to start with. Either you see or hear something externally, or you picture or think something to yourself internally that then creates a feeling, that then creates a behavior. So I say, okay, so when does the anxiety start? She says, before I'm about to start the race, I start to feel anxious. And I know that impedes me in my speed. Okay, so she's talking about the feeling anxious. Now, as a PCW practitioner, my job is to say, okay, so I need to find out what's causing the anxiety. So a little bit of exploration. It's mostly going to be one of a few small things. In this case, how she thinks in her head creates how she feels in her body. So, for example, she thinks to herself, I said, so when you're about to do the race, if I was going to draw a cartoon of you in the bubbles above your head, what is it you have up until now typically been thinking to yourself? And she said, what I think, she says, I know this sounds a bit crazy, but I think this is going to really hurt. That's the information. Now, the important thing is not the content, but how it sounds. This is a key element in PCW. So I say, do you think it in a confident, happy, motivated tone, or is it in a different kind of tone of voice? She goes, oh God, it's just in an anxious tone of voice. Because the feeling that you get has a direct counterpart to how you think. You can't think in an anxious voice and get a relaxed feeling. So she thinks to herself, oh God, this is going to hurt, starts to get the feeling of anxiety. That creates the break or the slowing down in being able to do the speed. So in PCW, there's a few processes that we do. One of them is changing the speed of the thinking, because it's not what she thinks, it's how she's thinking it. So if I think to myself, oh God, that's going to be terrible, then my nervous system gets the message, there's a problem. If I think to myself, oh God, it's going to be terrible, if I change how it sounds, it changes how it feels. So we change the phrase and slow down the phrase. And then what happens is she comes back next week and says, I haven't had any anxiety at all. It's been really strange. Normally I would get this feeling, but now I'm not getting it at all. But I still haven't got my best time yet. I need to get the best time for to be able to qualify. And it needs to be better than my best time that I've ever had. So I say, okay, what else would be useful? And she said, when I'm on the starting blocks, before the gun gets shot, when they go ready, set, I'm too tense at that point. Okay, so what I do is I get up our good friend YouTube, get her to close her eyes, get her to hear the sound as close as we can get before, and get to do some relaxation stuff so we've got it exactly at the right state, not too concentrated, not too ambitious, but not too relaxed. So feels that she's in the right zone to be able to start to do the run. And I send her away, because every client session is recorded. So all client sessions are recorded for the client to listen back to. This is really important, because a lot of the time when people come for sessions, they come with the problem in their heads and they're just thinking more and more about the problem. They're not able to get a third position and to listen to things. A week later, I get an email saying, I've just got my lifetime best time and I've qualified for the Commonwealth Games. My trainer doesn't understand what it is that you did, because he has been telling me for the last 18 months, you just need to picture yourself being confident. You just need to look at yourself feeling confident. It's not a visual representation that's been creating the problem. It's been an auditory representation. How she thinks in her head is what creates the feeling, not what she pictures. So he could be there all day long talking about visual elements. It's not that's the main driver for the actual work. Now, this is just one example, but for anxiety-related conditions, my experience is over 90% of them are internal dialogue and internal voice. And one of the processes that I have in PCW, which Steve Andreas, who is a very well-known NLP person, described as one of the two best processes of all processes he'd ever come across in his entire history of working with clients, is one of the ones I will be teaching in India, and I teach as standard in the workshops. And it works brilliantly with anything to do with anxiety, phobias, hesitation, confidence, and it's really simple as well, which is what I like. You know, we're really interested in things that work. You know, what's the adjustment that makes the difference? Now, that's a good example in a coaching situation. But it could equally be it could equally be a business situation, or it could be a therapy situation. We're looking at what happens in the sequence which makes things better. If you were in a situation, for example, and you wanted a company and you wanted to generate more customers, then you would want greater association with the product and with all the benefits of the problem. Well, not the problem, of the product. You're looking to get people more connected. If you're working with, say, somebody who's got anxiety or problem states, you're mostly wanting things to be more disconnected. So all we're ever doing is either engagement or disengagement, according to the context, if that makes sense.
It's very interesting case study that you've shared, Nick. Do we have questions here from people?
People of India, this is your opportunity. You can ask whatever you want. I mean, there's lots of applications. I've worked with a lot of business, a lot of private clients, coaching clients, legal people, public speaking, a lot of public speaking issues, a lot of therapeutic problems, addictions, compulsions, huge range of different things. But the template is mostly the same.
So while people are thinking, let me ask you this. So very interestingly, when you identify that, how do you know that it's the speed of thought, which is the cause of concern? I mean, is there a way to reach to that conclusion, or is there a way to identify that? Is it the visual image, or is it the auditory image which is troubling your client?
It's even simpler than that. I like to think about things as, in America, they have Simpsons. I'm not sure if they have the Simpsons. They know about the Simpsons in India. But we're looking at a really basic, simple way of finding out. If I have somebody and they have say an anxiety, say they have an anxiety issue. Let's say I was talking to you and you said I just have let's say it's a flying anxiety about flying, getting on an airplane. Then what I would say is, okay, so when you think about it, what's the first thing that you're noticing in terms of how you feel or what's going through your head? Because you've got to have something which is indicating the actual feeling. So when you think about it, what typically do you think to yourself or do you say to yourself? And mostly what happens is people are running an internal phrase. You can't get a feeling of anxiety without some internal phrase triggering it. So how you think creates how you feel. Rekha, to everyone, I would like to share my experiences with my clients. Okay.
So Rajendran has asked this question: how do you inculcate the change of speed in thinking with clients? How do you inculcate? How do you make that change happen? How do you inculcate?
Oh, how do you make it happen? Okay, good question. I'll give you very, very, very simple answer. The first thing is you would say, okay, to start with, how are you thinking about it at the moment? So, for example, if somebody is thinking to themselves, if somebody was thinking about an airplane, getting on an airplane, they're feeling anxious, and they think to themselves, oh no, it's going to be terrible. That would be speed that they're thinking about at the moment. So one of the processes might be to say, okay, when you think about it like that, notice if you think in the anxious voice, you start to get an anxious feeling. So that's the first example. Now, we're going to make some changes. So now think about it like you're reading out of a magazine or a book. So, oh no, it's going to be terrible. Then take a deep breath in. Now think about it like it's a question. Oh no, it's going to be terrible. So it sounds like a question. Take a deep breath in. Now we'll slow down the phrase. So we think it like this. Oh, no. Oh, no. it's gonna be terrible. Get the client to think it in the slowed down way. Now picture it on a big board so you can see the words. Now space out the words. And now fade out the words until there's nothing left. Running the whole phrase through that process will disconnect from the previous feeling state. I've done about 2,800 clients with this process, and I've never had any client get back any kind of anxious state, not one person. So the key thing is to calibrate to them to check that they are changing the speed of it and they're changing how they think it. But this is simple stuff. It's not complicated. There's not, you don't have to go and do a PhD in linguistics and voice exercises and, you know, go to the sacred Buddhist monastery in the Himalayas and walk up the mountain or anything. This is a simple stuff. If you know what to do, all we're ever doing is just making small adjustments that make big adjustments. People get too hung up on content and they get too fixated on content. The provocative conversational style is to get the client engaged. These processes and some of the relaxation are then to get them to be able to just be able to step away from being so engaged. And then by time framing the session so they listen back to it, they're listening back in the future and hearing how when they think differently, they feel differently and they respond differently. So there's three different elements that are going on.
Okay, thank you. So another question that CN is asking, he's saying there are two elements to the process. One is provocative inquiry into the nature of the problem, and then getting awareness of the thinking and the nature of thought. But what else is needed to be successful?
There's actually three. The third thing is you're always recording the session for the client. So when you record the session for the client, you're creating a future product for them to listen back to. So while you're talking to the client in a coaching session, during a session, you're saying, you might say, for example, so from what we have done so far, what are you noticing that's different when you think this way? This is for them to listen back to on the audio. So you're actually doing three different things. Now, within those three things, there's lots of other things as well, but this is the basic principles. Because what you know for certain, huh?
Go ahead, please. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. When I see clients, also I do a lot of what I call psychoeducation with them. So what I often say to them is say, okay, well, now here are some possibilities in what we can do. You know, in our session. Possibility one. We'll just sit here and see if anything happens. Well, that's a bit crazy. We're going to do nothing. We'll just see if something happens. That's not really, you know, which most people go, no, I don't want to pay just to sit and see if anything happens. But we're not going to do that. Number two, we're going to do exactly the same thing that you've been doing so far that doesn't work, which might be analyze more, think more. It's never worked up until now, so the chances are it's not going to work. So that's not a good solution. Or number three, we will start to explore a different way of thinking, create a different way of feeling, to create a different behavior. That means to start with getting good information and finding out what's the difference that makes the difference in a situation. So there's lots of different elements. The best way is to actually be a client when you experience it firsthand.
Okay, fantastic. Rekha, you wanted to share something, some of your experience?
Yes. Hi, Nick. Hi, everybody here. So
hello. I can see a still picture of you.
Yeah,
so you're either sitting very still or it's a
no, I haven't switched on much. So what here I observe is, especially when I have interacted with a couple of my clients, I have used my observation powers in terms of what's causing them, how they are reacting when they're getting anxious. Like one of them, she would start breathing very heavily, and you know, her rate of speed of speech would start increasing to a rocket science. I mean, you know, the speed would be tremendous. And the moment she would be calm, I would tell her, you seem to be much more calmer here now, because, you know, the speed of your speech has come down, because she was working on certain things very personal for herself. And the moment she would talk about certain instance, her anxiety would start going up. So and she's somebody who's very visual, and somebody, you know, where she shared that, you know, she writes everything for herself. So the moment she started writing, I said, before you talk about it, would you like to write and then talk about it? And the moment she started writing and talking about it, she started feeling much calmer day by day.
Yeah, because as soon as she starts to write, firstly, it's visual disassociation. It's also definition. It's also external as opposed to internal. I do a lot. When I was in Japan, the last time I was in Japan, we did a lot of work on visual stuff. I just wanted to test stuff out. So I would say, don't tell me what the problem is. Draw the problem. Draw it.
Sure. So another example was that while I was coaching one of, you know, she's a very young leader who's just joined an organization, 2-3 years experience, and she was having certain issues in terms of getting along with her team and all that. And the moment some issue would come to her with the current issues that she's managing, she would start getting anxious about it. So I told her, if that is something as anxious that you're getting, why don't you write things down for yourself and come back to it after some point of time, you know, come back to it after 3-4 hours, and then observe what are you feeling about it. And she shared that that worked brilliantly with her, because she was able to focus on her current challenges. And when she would read back what she has written, what was the cause of the anxiousness for her, she felt that, you know, she was unnecessarily getting anxious. There was no reason for her to get anxious about it. And that started getting a little calming effect on her. So as a coach, what learning that I had is that we need to really observe our clients in terms of what's going on with them first.
Oh yeah. Well, the
so that was a great learning for me.
Yeah, I mean, if you the alternative to not observing is to ignore what's going on, and that's not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
All the information is mostly there with clients. The key thing is the main question is to always consider, how are they creating the problem? What are they doing in order to create this problem and maintain this problem? Now, you can observe lots of different things that are happening with the client, but the question is, what are they doing? And one of the things that I do when I see clients and I get notes ahead of time for clients is I will always ask the question, when is it better? When is it worse? What do we want more of? What do we want less of? So we're looking very simply at what do they typically do. People who tend to be have a lot of anxiety, it's all based around speed. So everything's going super fast. Think more, go faster, go faster, go faster. Feelings get more thinking. So you get this looping effect of everything going a million miles an hour. So the main thing with that is to be able to get people to slow down so that they are at a level where it feels okay for them. But let's remember, this is all about context. Sometimes people need to speed up because they need to be a bit more motivated to get things going. So it's all about the context that's important to assist the client. And the way of working in PCW is to really empower the client to think better and for them to affirm that they are experiencing something more useful. It's not for the coach to be endlessly sort of pumping them up and giving them reassurances so they become dependent on the coach. It's to empower the client so the client is more affirming, they're more ease in themselves, and they're able to run their own brains better than previously.
Yeah. So when I did this observation and when I shared it with them, and when they started practicing on their own for themselves, that really helped them. So they felt more empowered for themselves rather than coming back to me saying, why am I feeling anxious about it? They knew why they are feeling, and they were able to control it for themselves. And that also created an empowerment for them, and also created a change for them to manage their situations for themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
I mean,
I'll
this
give
is
you an
just that I
example.
wanted.
We talked about case studies. I had a client come to see me once, and I looked at his notes and I thought, this must be a mistake. And I said, it says here in your notes, you've had 150 coaching sessions. And he went, yeah, it might be more than that. And I was thinking, goodness me, I mean, what on earth has he been talking about? And I said, what was the purpose of the coaching? Why did you go for the sessions in the first place? And he said, the reason I went was I wanted to find out why I feel anxious in certain situations. And I said, that's easy. I will give you that for free. 10-second guaranteed explanation. You think an anxious thought, which creates an anxious feeling. There's only a few ways that you can get the thinking part to be that way. You see something externally and you think something. You hear something externally, you think something. You picture something in your head and think something, or you just run some internal commentary. You can't just get the feeling state. You have to do one of those things.
Yeah.
So I'm looking and I'm scanning to see how are they creating the problem. So
Thanks,
in
Rekha.
coaching and NLP, huh?
Yeah.
I was just saying, thanks, Rekha, for sharing that. Nick, is there a structure to the PCW model that people can grab? Is there a structure? I mean, I understand that there are 3 phases where we're talking about the problem and the thought process. And you mentioned that you use some processes as part of your model. Is there a structure that is available for us to look at?
A structure for you to look at. Well, I'll give you a simple explanation, in this respect. The starting point is, firstly, you're always working in the here and now. You're working with the client in the here and now. So this is not a step-by-step process where you say, okay, step 1, do this. Now proceed to do this and to do this and to do this, because that's very digital, logical, sequential. You start off by, the first stage is to say, okay, so what's the problem? So you find out from the client how they're thinking about the problem and the way in which they're thinking about it. And you look to get as much information in terms of how they phrase it, how they describe it, the metaphors that they use, the language that they use. Are they using visual language, auditory language? How are they, what's happening in their heads, basically. So that's the first bit. The second part is when you hear that information, you challenge what they're actually saying in terms of the generalizations. So let me give you an example. Client says, I just feel anxious all the time. That's a big blanket statement. So a response to that might be, okay, so like 24 hours a day, every second of every minute. And they would usually go, well, no, not all the time, because it won't be all the time. So then immediately we get them to start to think differently. Once you have the information, then with some of the PCW techniques, you start to change the way in which people think. So the changing the internal voice might be one way of doing things. Changing how somebody feels might be doing another way. There's lots of different ways you can change the original processing. The third part is, while this is all happening, you're recording the session for the client. So if I'm doing any relaxation with the client, I would also have things where I would say, as you're listening to this now, you have already noticed, and I would feed back what they had already observed. Now, every client is different and every situation is different. So this isn't like assembling a piece of furniture where you just go, add this to this to this to this. You're working with what comes back from the client, which is the lady just said. The key thing is you have to pay attention and listen to what they're saying and how they're saying it. which is quite different. There's a lot of processes, they'll just say stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, do this. Mostly that misses the detail of what's happening in client sessions. In PCW, there's 27 different stances the practitioner might adopt with the client. Then there's many different ways in which you might change the visual or the auditory or the kinesthetic representations.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things going on.
Fantastic. We have a volunteer here, CN Murthy. He's volunteering for a demo session. Is that okay with you, Nick?
All right. Well, we'll see what we can do within the limitations of Zoom and everything else.
We have another 10,
okay. Why
minutes.
not?
Okay.
All
CN,
right.
you're on.
So you're okay. So what's the problem?
Okay. Shall I get on? Oh, let me just start my video. Would that? Is it?
There you are. I can see you. Yes.
You see me. Okay. I have a question to you. When you talked about listening to the tone and the voice and so on, Nick. Is it also important that sessions like this have to be face to face, where you get more, sort of signals about what is?
I prefer to be. The more sensory information you have, the better. So if you can see the person and hear them, then that is obviously better than just hearing. Because people will give a lot of information non-verbally as well as verbally. So the more you have with the person in front of you, then the more information you have in being able to calibrate and to notice how to work and how to interact with the person. So yes.
So while interacting, would you also be bringing to his notice this, his body postures and his facial expressions and what you, is that also?
Well, it might be. It might be, but it depends completely on the client. I'm not a fan of big generalizations. I mean, in the 80s, there was in England, certainly, lots and lots of books on body language. This was the latest thing. Everybody's talking about body language. If a person's looking like this, this means this. If they look down, this means this. If they have their arms folded, this means this. There's all sorts of massive generalizations, which may or may not be true. So it's the danger with those things is you start to make assumptions. So everything can give an indication, but a good coach or practitioner is looking at the whole thing and looking to see, is all the information, does it line up? I'll give you an example. If you're working with somebody and you do some work and you say, okay, so how does that feel now? And if they say, yeah, I think it might be better, they've not affirmed that it's better. If in the voice tone it sounds hesitant, they haven't said that it's better. If I say to a client, okay, if the anxiety was a 10 and now we have done some work, what number is it now? And they say, it could be a 5 or a 6. I'll say, well, is it a 5 or is it a 6? Because that's a big difference between a 5 and 6. So I'm always getting the client to be very specific and to affirm what's happening.
Okay.
Rather than just have a massive generalization and then we've moved on to something else and we haven't really found out what's going on.
Great. So shall I just share the problem that I would like?
Sure. Okay. Let's just do very quickly. Okay. So what's the problem?
Okay. A little bit of a background. I'm retired. I'm 68 years of age. I've been coaching post, being associated with corporate industry for nearly 40 years, and I've been coaching for the past 10 years. At this point in time, I'm in a phase where I'm relaxed and not really chasing anything in life. One thing that I've noticed is that my sleep habits have changed dramatically. I seem to be...
For the better or for the worse?
Definitely for the worse, because I tend to sleep late And somewhere in the middle of the night, around 3:30, I get up, and I just can't go back to sleep again. And this sort of leaves me tired and drowsy at times, and it does impact life. And I'm wondering,
well, maybe the universe is just telling you you've had your sleep quota.
yes, but I still feel tired during the day. So I guess my sleep quota.
Being tired is not the worst thing that can happen. Could be a lot worse. You're still able to function and you're still conscious.
Yes and no. At times I do, and at times I just feel like giving up everything and just hopping back into bed and taking a nap.
Well, that might be a good solution. Just go into an extended sleep, like hibernation.
But the real
where is he? He's gone into 6 months sleep mode.
Yeah, that's okay. I can understand that from a theoretical way of looking at it. But the reality is that there's so much that I really want to do, which is not getting done.
Well, some things don't get done. Some things don't get done. There's a lot of stuff that never gets done. You just go, is the world waiting for some great piece of work from you?
It's not about what the world is waiting for. It's what's going to give me energy. It's all about how I feel. And that to me is the most important thing at this point of time.
It may be that you've had your allocation of energy for this incarnation, and now you're just slowing down.
Why does that not make me happy?
Well, not everybody can be happy. There's only so much happiness can go around.
Now I'm really feeling old and done for.
Well, I mean, you're 60. Okay, you're a little bit older than me. But like, you know, you get to a certain point, and then, well, you know, it's just slowly just grinding to a halt. It could be karma. That's the other thing. It might.
No, I'm sorry. I missed that. You said it could be karma?
Yeah, it could be karmic.
Waking up at 3 in the night is definitely not harming me.
In some previous lifetime, you might have been very, very, you might have been waking up other people, and now karmically it's come back full circle. The universe is out to demonstrate something. You can hear, I can hear the thinking from here in England. I can hear the cogs whirring away inside your head.
It does. It is. It is. And if I really get in touch with what I'm thinking right now, it's funnily enough, it's not. I mean, just accepting that this is karma, what I have done in the past, which is causing me this distress today.
Might have been some Egyptian pharaoh. Who knows? Now, all I'm doing is I'm just throwing out different things. I'm throwing out different possibilities. When you try to get to, let me approach this in a different way. When you think about going to sleep, do you go into a state of sleep quite easily, or are you anxious about waking?
There is an element of anxiety which has crept in today, which was
okay. Now, when there's an element of anxiety, close your eyes for a second. When you have an element of anxiety, what are you typically thinking to yourself? What's going through your head?
Is it going to be another night like yesterday's?
Is it going to be another night like yesterday? Okay, keep your eyes closed. When you think, is it going to be another night like yesterday? Is that in a relaxed voice or is it in a bit of an anxious?
Honestly, I think when the thought first strikes me, it is with a degree of anxiety. But
Yeah.
these days I manage that.
Okay, I'm going to stop you
Doing
there.
deep breathing. Yeah.
I'm going to stop you there because I'm only interested in changing the sequence. So I want you to think like you're reading out of a book. Is it going to be another night like yesterday? Just think it like that one time. Take a deep breath in. Let me know when you've done it.
Yes.
Okay, now I want you to think it like it's a question. Is it going to be another night like yesterday? So it's like a curiosity. Think it one time, then take a deep breath in.
Yes. Yes.
Now I'm going to slow down the phrase. Keep your eyes closed. I'm going to do it super slow. Is it gonna be another night like yesterday? Slow it down to that speed so everything is super slow. When you have thought it one time, let me know.
Yes.
Now see these words on a big board in front of you so you can see them written out and start to space out all the different words. And then take a deep breath in.
Yes.
And now gradually fade out all the different words so it gets a little bit fainter, and then they disappear. And take a deep breath in.
Yes.
Now, let some new phrase come to mind that would be more reassuring or more helpful. Something that would be useful, that would take you into a good sense of sleep and a good sense of rest. When you've found something, make sure it's something that really works well, and then hear it inside your imagination. And when you hear it inside your imagination, notice what's different about this phrase to the previous.
Yes.
When you think the new phrase, what's different?
I think there's a great element of peace that gets into the
Greater element of peace. Okay, and open your eyes. Now this is really super quick, sort of tiny little demonstration. I would do a lot more different things, but what we're doing is we're starting to change the speed. Because what happens is people get an experience, then they start to picture and imagine they're going to get the same thing. I get a lot of people with insomnia and sleep issues. They started to anticipate the same thing. So it's a bit like a laptop. It doesn't properly shut down. It's still kind of working in the background. So the hard drive hasn't shut down. So it doesn't go into a state of rest. When people have sleep issues, there's too much stimulation. There's too much attention still there rather than relaxation. So it's about disengaging from the previous way of thinking. A lot of very, very common. And usually people are used to thinking a lot, and they're used to anticipating and planning, and they can multitask. They can do all that really, really well. but when it comes to sleep, they find it difficult to disengage. So they're not getting the balance in things.
We are on the top
That
of
makes
the hour. It's 8:30. Cian, in quickly 2 minutes, can you reflect and tell us what you have gone through just now?
Well, if I look at what I went through in the beginning, honestly, it was all chaos, and I was really wondering what on earth was happening, and a whole sense of incredulity, and one almost started laughing even. Okay, it got to that level. But I think when I think I've got to get more into it and think a little bit more about my thinking and what was really happening within me. With that exercise, go slow, think differently. And you're actually it's a visualization that you're doing within yourself, and I think that sort of had its effect, because those thoughts, you're right, is the thinking that creates that anxiety within one, and I think it sort of just reinforced that message to me in a very powerful way, and I recognize that.
Okay.
Well,
there's a lot more. There's a lot more to do. This is just a tiny little 2-second demonstration.
I'm so sure this is only the beginning. This is just the beginning and a microcosm of the whole process.
The starting point is always a little bit, you think, what on earth's going on? Why is he talking about reincarnation? This doesn't make any sense at all. We are not directly working in the traditional coaching way. Because here's what I know from watching you. You're somebody who thinks quickly, you can articulate, you can multitask, probably plan things, figure things out, good problem solver, good at doing all that. So anything that I do which is predictable, you'll be anticipating. So I've got to go outside of that. So I will just throw in things which are completely outside your normal way of thinking.
Fantastic. So
when I come to Bangalore...
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Thank you for your time. I think it was very well and fantastic.
Good. Okay. Well, it's very good talking to you.
Yeah.
And I look forward.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to that too.
All right. We will continue where we stopped off.
Yeah, I remember not to sleep.
All right then.
Till then.
See you later.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.